Hey guys, today we have Eric. Eric, if you could start here, when did you join the program? So how long have you been in the program? And can you give people a brief overview of, I guess, your situation when you're first starting out?
So I joined later than I should have in February of 20, I think, yeah, this year, February 24.
February 24. So
Yeah.
we're like at 8 months now. Yeah, give us a brief overview of how things were like when you first joined with your marriage.
I thought everything was fine, to be perfectly honest. Maybe that's a common theme, but like we had our ups and downs as a married couple, but we both were going to church, we were serving together. I thought we'll get into this later, I'm sure, about providing value. I was bringing in all the income. We have a nice house. Like I thought everything was working out well. About 2 weeks into November of 2023, I could tell my wife was getting a little bit colder towards me. We had gone to couples therapy in the past, and that was mainly because we were having a tough time like communicating. Um, and so we got these little guidelines to live by. And so I walked in one day to the room and just said, "Hey, like I want to sit down and talk to you." And that's not normal for me. Normally I'm very headstrong and like this is kind of how it is. And she didn't receive it and goes, "Look, I don't think I can give you what you're looking for. Like I want a divorce." And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was not expecting it. She had threatened it in the past, maybe years ago, but in a very angry way when we would have fights. But we very rarely fought. And in our whole marriage of 9 years, I'd say we probably fought like full fights maybe 3 or 4 times. So it wasn't like we're bickering constantly. So to me, it was a shock. And so, yeah, so I was just completely caught off guard. And she was giving me nothing. It was straight stonewall from that
How
point forward.
long, how long were you married at that point? But how long were you together
Nine,
and
nine
married?
years. nine
Married
years.
9 years and then together probably
Married
long,
nine
a little bit
years. Yeah.
longer. Yeah.
Together for like 11.
Okay. Looking back, do you feel like there were signs? Or even when you look back now, do you still feel like, I don't know, I didn't see it.
Oh no, going through the program, there were definitely signs. I did not have that antithetic filter to figure them out. Um, there was times when I look back, like I was distant. I had no emotional awareness at all. I never would give her anything that was going on inside of me. I would kind of bottle it up and just sink it down in my stomach and just move forward and press forward. And then I would basically exclude her from events, family. I mean, she eventually told me, like, "Hey, I don't remember one person from your family even coming up at our wedding to acknowledge me." She's like, "It was all my family from Ireland." So she had been experiencing this distance from day one, but I didn't have the tools to communicate with her about emotional stuff. I didn't think I was always taught as a kid growing up as a man, like guys don't talk about their emotions. So yeah, there were plenty of things I'm sure we can get into that were signs that I should have seen, but I didn't. Like we're both Christians, so I was like, divorce is not an option. Like it doesn't.
Mm,
That's not even in our vocabulary.
I think I can
yeah.
really relate to that, Eric,
Mhm.
because and I was very much in the same situation as you, where, we had kind of one fight one night. I was like, okay, let's talk about it. And then all of a sudden my wife says, hey, I want a divorce. And all of a sudden you feel like the world fell out from under you. You're like,
Yep.
what the fuck? Like we haven't been having big issues. We haven't been having big fights. Nothing seemed like it was at the end of the world. But it was all those small things that we had just been missing constantly. And there were signs and hints, but I had no idea what to look for. I wasn't taught to pay attention to sort of those minutiae and details. I wasn't taught to look at what emotions that could have behind it. And
Yeah.
without recognizing that, and it hits you out of nowhere. You have no idea where it came from. And I think for me, I don't know if you had the same reaction, that actually caused me to be a little bit worse because I was sort of toxic at that point. Like, well, what are you talking about? Like, we haven't had fights. We do all this stuff. All this stuff seems great. There aren't really these many issues. Why would you want to get a divorce at this point, right? Did you go through something similar with that?
I did. I immediately went to what did I do in the beginning? That was where my head went, was what did I do in the beginning of the relationship to attract her in the first place? That was just my intuition to start doing. So I would go buy flowers. I got super needy. I was like writing her poetry. It was like the worst possible thing that you can do. I did, and she was actually pretty sweet about it. She was like, wrong approach. Like she didn't get angry. She was just like, that's the wrong approach. So she eventually was like, look, I'm gonna give you something that you need to look into. She was actually like, that's what's so weird about this. It was never like a fight after that. It was just like, for her, it felt like a giant relief. And I got this tree later. It was a giant relief, a load off her shoulders, because apparently she had been feeling this way for years, at least 2 years, where she was like, I can't do the rest of my life like this. I don't want to end up like Eric's parents, which they're still together. Like I thought my family's relationship was good, but she knew what a good relationship looked like, and I didn't. So anyway, she goes, look, I'm going to give you a hint. She goes, you need to have frame. And I'm like, what the hell is frame? What does that even mean? And so I went down a rabbit hole on YouTube and started looking into what masculine frame meant. And I'm like, I shoot guns. I'm in bands. Like I love everything, man. I love going to the gym. I'm like, what does this even mean? Is it like Andrew Tate? Like, what does this actually mean? So I went down that rabbit hole, and that was the wrong direction. And I know now, but at the time that's where it all started. This whole journey.
Let's talk about that masculine frame a bit, because I think that led you to joining a headman who was led
Yep.
by Casey Zander. He's actually in
Yep.
the same mastermind cohort as I am, interestingly, and we actually started around the same time.
Yeah.
I guess tell me about your experience with that, because for you to be interviewing with me, to be honest, I am a very different character than Casey Zander. Like you put us in the room side by side, look at our philosophies, you cannot imagine that we're even like the same mind, the same species. First of all, what did you learn there? Like, how did that course help you? And of course, since you're here, how did that course not help you?
Hmm. Well, the first thing I noticed, I'll give you a similarity. You are young, and he was young when he recorded it. But what I didn't know is that when I started the program, it wasn't actually one of his offerings at the time. So it's not like an ongoing thing. He had launched a product. That product at the time contained like group talks, coaching calls, things like that. When I joined, that had already finished. So he had moved on to like helping single guys, not married guys. So that was the first thing. There was no one-on-one. There was no coaching calls. There was no nothing. But from the modules, what did help is he talked about discovering your purpose, which is more of a life thing. And it is somewhat personal and self-growth. But from there, you learn, again, what he considers to be masculine frame, which is how you conduct yourself, how you carry yourself, your confidence level, how you dress, and basically carry this stigma that you are an irreplaceable person, but there's no internal work being done. So it's more of like a facade type. That's the way I received it, was more of a facade. And to be honest, it helped a little bit in the beginning because I was able to kind of like shut out all the negative thoughts that I had about myself and why I'm the problem, which turned out to be kind of the opposite in your program because I had a lot of problems that I needed to fix, especially mentally, victim mindsets, things like that. So it helped in the beginning to kind of like shake off all of the turmoil that was caused in that shock of a moment, but it didn't actually do anything internally. It wasn't withstanding. It wasn't a long-term solution. It was like a band-aid on a severed arm. You know, it just may stop the bleeding in certain places, but it's not going to actually do anything to fix anything.
Yeah.
And then I guess for me, Eric, when you were kind of going through that and sort of making sort of those like external, basically like using your willpower to sort of fake it changes and putting on that kind of persona for your partner, like was she buying it? Like did she sort of come back a little bit and then recognize, you know what, I don't think he's actually changed? Like how did she react as you were going through that program?
She actually was really receptive to the fact that I shared with her that I was in a program for myself. She was inquisitive, asking questions. See, this is the weird thing. I see a lot of guys in this program where, and this is just my own experience, where the the wife's completely shut off and then they bounce immediately, like straight out the door. This was a different situation because we were still living together. I just moved into our spare bedroom. But other than that, our daily lives were the same. Now, in the first like 2 months of being in Casey's program, we were distant, but yet I would still ask her to come out to dinner with me because I knew the only way that I'm going to get through this is through communication. So like we would still go out, but she would tell everyone, even strangers, oh yeah, this is soon to be my ex-husband. She would tell everybody we're getting a divorce. Everyone, people we didn't know, people at the bar, like everybody. So that was super awkward for me. But again, with his whole half frame, I was just like standing there like, okay, this isn't bothering me. It was bothering me, but like I didn't know, I didn't have the tools to do anything about it. So she was very receptive in terms of like asking questions about what I'm learning. The problem is at home, we use the same YouTube that connects to the TV. So like my recent watch history was all Casey stuff. So she started watching those videos. And then when I finally talked to him about it, he goes, oh, dude, if she's watching my videos, like you're screwed because she's not supposed to know what hypergamy is. She's not supposed to know how we're going to act. And so I'm like, wait a minute. So like, these are all tricks. Like these are all tactics. If she's not allowed to know what I'm doing, then that means this is just a bag of tricks. And I'm like, that's it. So then I
That's
bowed
interesting
out.
you say that because like in our program too, we recently had a guy who actually I'm not gonna name names, but like his wife just joined our program too. And then we had a call with him because he was worried, oh, will my wife know if my wife knows about the stuff we're learning here, is that gonna be a bad thing? And we said to him, like, why would it be? It's only bad if you're doing it in a manipulative way, but are you? Have you been
Mm-hmm.
doing the work? Because nothing we do here is manipulative in any way. But I'm guessing from your story too, it seems like sure, the stuff, the masculine frame you were learning, the external manifestation of it you were learning helped a little bit, but you felt like that was not sustainable for you because it was
Right.
all it. You had to fight to become that, and it just didn't feel like you. Was that right?
Pretty much. I mean, I knew I needed more confidence. But at the same time, like we had just been like it was the reason I was so blindsided is because we were living, in my opinion, like a good life before then. So for the last before that, maybe 6 months, we were going to the gym every day, together. And I went from like 230 pounds to 170. So like I in the 8 months had a huge physical transformation. So I felt like I had that frame already, but I just knew that there's no his methodology in terms of how to speak to your spouse was very upfront, blunt, and mainly sexual driven versus emotional driven. So he was like, you need to get the attraction back first versus there's no emotional connection. It doesn't matter because every woman has hypergamy and she's on the hunt for her next man and you have to somehow figure out how to get her back to you. So it was mainly more sexual driven than it was emotionally driven. And I
Mm.
just, something in me was like, that can't be right because while we had a great sex life and we're trying to have kids, this was also the point while I was blindsided is like, we were on a pregnancy schedule up until the time when she was like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, she's like throwing out the pregnancy tests and getting rid of everything. So it was really strange how that all happened. But yeah, it was mainly sexual driven versus this program covers the whole gamut of
Yeah.
the mountain.
So when your wife told you divorce route, I'm guessing what, panic at that point?
But
Uh how how hopeless did you feel or how difficult did he seem at that point in time to overcome? Like what were you telling yourself at that point in time?
in the beginning, immediately I was like, okay, I can get through this. We've we've had issues before, but nothing this extreme. But I still had hope. I was like, this isn't over. So I immediately, which what I know how to do was go into prayer. And I thought maybe this is a spiritual attack on her because I don't know if I mentioned, but we're both Christians. So I said, maybe this is a spiritual attack and that can only be like resolved through prayer and fasting. So I started praying and fasting more than I ever have before. And her resistance was so strong. I had never heard the things coming out of her mouth that she had said to me. which weren't super crazy, but it was like, oh, do all of that for your next spouse. Like, you're still young, you can go find someone else. You want to be a dad, go find someone else. And all of those things were like, I had never heard her talk like that before. I was like, the resistance was so strong. It wasn't until maybe a month after, close to Christmas that year, that I started to lose hope, because Casey's program wasn't working. It helped a little bit with me, but that's about it. It kept me from breaking down, like, emotionally. But then I was like, there's got to be something else that I can do, because this isn't changing anything.
Yeah. So what led you to eventually find my work, and what about my work attracted you to say that's the next step? Because there's so many coaches out there, there's so many avenues you can go to. And honestly, people with bigger audiences than I do. What made you trust me enough at that point?
It was really interesting because I only watched maybe 2 of your videos before I signed up for what is it, the
The
initial
webinar, masterclass,
the
whatever you
webinar.
want to
Yep.
call it. Yeah.
So I watched a couple videos, but the first one I watched was on safety. That clicked in my brain for some reason, because I'm like, wait, this is all stemmed on her not feeling safe. But why doesn't she feel safe? And I'm like, I don't know the answer. So I'm going to join the webinar and see if I can figure it out. After the webinar and getting connected with Jason, I was like, just asking him regular questions. I really liked how he answered me very upfront, blunt. This is going to be the hardest thing you're ever going to do, but like, it's going to be worth it. And you have to put in all your effort. And one thing I know about myself is, once I put my mind to something, you can call it done. In business, whatever, it's done. So that, again, I didn't really go down a rabbit hole and look at all your videos. It was like 2 mainly about safety. And I'm like, this makes sense to me just on the pure point that you're like, if she doesn't have this, forget all the rest. And it kind of clicked, because I'm like, well, I'm going to sexual passion, which what we call it, but he's talking about attracting her sexually. And I'm like, but if she doesn't feel safe, that, like, what does that matter? So
Yeah.
that's initially how I just started. It was like a leap of faith almost.
You know, this
And
kind of hard question. So sorry, James, go ahead.
I think that that's kind of interesting to me, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, Eric, because I mean, I know that you've obviously talked about your faith, right? And you're a devout Christian, but like,
No.
I know that you've probably seen other people who've come to the program, and maybe you've seen people on YouTube and stuff. A lot of people, we've had clients who've gone kind of the other way, who are men of faith, who would say, you know what, my partner is violating the sanctity of marriage, and they get really blame about that, and they get very upset about the fact that their partner would think about a divorce and go against their vows, and they would make it more of their partner's issues than their own. And we've also had people who've said, like, we prayed and we expected God to come and save the relationship for them. And I think that what allowed you to kind of avoid those traps and sort of instead recognize that you needed to do the work, and how did that sort of, I guess, align with your faith?
And one more thing too, to add to that, Eric, is so if you are in the program, you'll know I'm an atheist. Did that ever, was that ever a point of doubt for you? And did you find any of the program to be unchristian in any way, or going
First of all,
against
I didn't know
Christianity in
that
any
you
way,
were an
religion?
atheist.
Okay,
Yeah, I
yeah.
didn't know that. And it doesn't come out clearly in the program, in my opinion. So no, it wasn't a thing. But to James's point, like, it's not that I didn't fall into those traps, but like, I don't trust in my wife more than I trust in God. So meaning, my faith was in God, knowing that his word says that divorce is not an option. Like, Jesus says divorce is not an option. So to me, it wasn't like I was blaming her. I was like, she's obviously going through something, and I don't know what that feels like, because I've never gotten to that place where I've wanted to just completely eliminate her from my life. But I just tried to keep my faith focused on what I believed was to be correct. And we can go into this later, but the program actually helped me break down time, principle and process after principle and process of like, well, wait, no, I have to let her go. And that came way later. But in the beginning, I was like, it was just focus on my faith and what I can control. Because everything that's outside of my control, like how she was feeling, I tried not to go there inside of me, because it wasn't it wasn't anything that there was nothing I could do about that at the time, right?
Why
Because the
not
first
take
thing
the
we learn
route?
is,
Because like, why not take the route though of let's just pray about it, let's just fast about it, like you said earlier,
yeah,
and it'll be fine. Because there are some people who are religious in the program who use religion as an excuse to not do the work. But you
mm,
almost use the program as an excuse to do the work, to lean into the work. What what's different with you, do you think?
well, I believe that when I pray for something, like God doesn't just come out audibly with the voice out of the sky and say like, "Here's your answer." Usually, it's process oriented. For example, the Beatitudes are in Matthew. Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. And for non-Christian, all that means is that he gave kind of like life lessons, right? And teaching a bunch of people. But most of his teachings have to do with you do something now and it's a process to then get to something later. So your reward is later. It's never right this second. So I just knew like I'm not going to just do, and this might be controversial to some Christians, but the Bible's gives you a lot of principles, but it's not a ton of process. So I knew there had to be something that I was missing. And if I just relied on my prayer and fasting to somehow change her, it's just not in my nature to do that. I just felt like there's got to be something that I'm missing. And maybe because she was becoming a little bit more worldly, she was just tired of all of we had gone through so much spiritual stuff, which we won't get into right now, but like there was so much stuff going on church wise that I felt like, well, maybe I'm missing something that's not just flat out given to me. And I felt like my prayer to God was like, show me what I need to do, not how to change her, but just what I need to do. That's when I found the webinar. And I'm
Mhm.
like, just taking a leap of faith. Like, I'm just going to do this and see how it goes. Cause I already tried Casey's. I already spent $3,500 on that. I was like, that didn't do anything. It's not about money. I was like, I'm missing something and I
Mm.
have to figure out what it is. And it turned out, I know you're an atheist now that you said that, but like, to me, the program is biblically inspired because a lot of the same processes exist.
Look, so just to tell you, just to caveat that a little bit, I grew up in a very traditional household, Indonesian household, where, so Indonesia back then, if you were a Christian, you were executed, basically. So my
Mm,
parents were Christian. And so you can
yeah.
imagine how devout of a Christian they are to be risking that in Indonesia. So obviously my mom grew up very, very Christian. And I had to make a decision very early on whether I wanted to follow that or not follow that. And when I left the religion, I told my mom basically, Mom, I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't know. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, at that point in time, I've read the Quran 2 times. I read the Christian Bible 3 times. I probably know more about the Bible than most Christians, to be honest, because I had to study it like crazy growing up. And I told her, I, I'm just going to follow what is right, what is going to make me happiest, but also what is going to make other people happiest at the same time. I'm going to follow what works. I'm going to create the
Mm,
most value possible. And if that happens to be Christians, great. If that happens to be non-Christian ideas, great. But if God is going to put me in hell because simply I did not worship him, but I lived by every Christian value possible, then that is not a God that I want to be a part of, kind of thing. And she understood that. And she allowed me to just do that. And so when I created the program, it was with that philosophy in mind. It wasn't about like Christian or Buddhist, whatever it is. I'll take the best ideas from everywhere I can get and I will make a program out of it, kind of thing. And in fact, that's part of the reason why I questioned the faith in the beginning is because like I was noticing that, like you said earlier, you can take the same scripture and you can use it for bad or good. It depends on how you
mhm,
interpret it, how you use it as well. And I was noticing that people were using secular ideas, putting it on top of religious ideas, and using that to color the way they interpreted the scripture.
mm,
And I'm like, well, if they're using secular ideas to interpret the scripture, then why don't we go to the secular idea? And so that was when I expanded my mind to like exploring different things too. But
mm.
uh, which is why when people ask me about like, oh, I'm Christian or I'm Buddhist, I am Muslim, does this agree with my faith or not? It's like, well, it depends, right? If if your goal is to make yourself the happiest and your partner the happiest, your kids, and create the most value in the world, we can do that. So if that agrees with your religion or not, I don't know. It depends on your religion, I guess. But if you are Muslim or you're Christian, I'm guessing you have the same goal. So I just don't think there's any discordance there at all.
No, I'll be honest, I don't think there's anything in the program that I disagreed with in terms of just the principles and processes. If anything, I'd say that they amplify biblical principles anyways. Meaning, like, I'll give you just one example. Like, and if I could sum up the whole thing, it's basically like growing into a man. And I know a lot of men are like, I'm already a man, but no, I mean like actually being self-reliant and having all of your emotions, your thoughts, your mindsets, and everything being one with like your best self and taking responsibility for your life. And that comes from what? That comes from, yes, being a prayer warrior, believing in God, having faith, but like very few Christians that I know anyway, like take it to the next level and actually implement things. For example, when I started talking to Steph later about my victim mindsets, she's like, well, duh, Jesus says this, but I had never correlated it to that. So it was like, oh, but I knew in the moment that there was something breathing on the work that I was doing, because it wasn't like I was just following the program and then abandoning God. No, it was like, I said, thank you, God, for showing me this because this is helping. And then I would pray about how to interpret my VMs differently, how to untether. And it was like this tandem thing where I invited God into what I was doing. It wasn't like you just have to choose one way of doing things. It's like, no, there's a bunch of different ways that you can explore as long as you invite God in. And if you get that sense in your spirit, like if the Holy Spirit says, hey, this is not cool, then you have that internal clock alarm that goes off like, okay, wait, but there's nothing in the program that I've found that went against anything in my beliefs.
James, are you religious? Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're muted. But anyway,
yeah, so I'm a Roman Catholic. So
yeah.
I go to, I mean, I come from a very long Italian family in Philadelphia, and for us, it's church and Eagles. So that's really the two religions that we follow. But I mean, I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Eric in that I think one of the things that Eric probably knows about Roman Catholics is that our practicing is showing up on Easter and Christmas, and that's usually the two times that we actually go to Mass. We watch it online. That's our big thing. But I think being a part of the program and seeing how we impact people and seeing how different my life is now versus how it was before and how I interact with people, I think that, like Eric's saying, there isn't anything in the program that's contrary to the Bible. If anything, it leads you into being able to sort of address those more with spirituality and being more empathetic to your fellow man and being, I think it leads us to the kinder and more of the ideals that are taught in both Catholicism and Christianity.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper into the specifics of that. And I'm going to start with a broad question first, Eric, and we can go hone in from there. What did you find that in my program that made you, one, stick with it longer, and number two, for the lack of a better word, like, why did it work better than all the other stuff you tried before? Why was this the one, you think?
That comes down to having faith in the process. So I'll tell you, in the beginning, I had absolutely no idea how what you were teaching was going to help me. I had no clue. Like the first couple modules in the phase, I was like, what does this have to do with my marriage at all? Like learning how to learn. I'm like, I've been to college, like I'm done learning. It took me a long time to figure that out. But one thing I think that you did say was you used the word addiction a lot, right? Like be addicted to the process. And I used to be a heroin addict, which sounds crazy for people. And you're like, well, you're a Christian. That was before I got saved. But So I know all about addiction, and I've helped people come out of addiction and got them into the church and help serving and things like that. But I know what it means to be addicted, like fully. And so I was like, well, if what kept me going was like knowing if I follow this, so far everything sounds like I don't get it, but there's been a lot of things in my life that I don't get until you get further along, and then you can finally see, oh, that's what everything was for. That's a lot of what happens in spirituality too. Like as a Christian, you growing up, they call them baby Christians, right? You're drinking milk. Once you get to the solid food, like you grow up, once you get to the solid food, you go, oh, that's why I had to go through that whole process. So that was already kind of ingrained in me. So it was more of just long suffering. Like, I don't know why the coaches are asking me to do this stuff, but I'm just going to do it and, hope for the best, because I really had no clue in the beginning what it had to do with my marriage. But after, I would say probably P1M4, which for those in the program will understand, basically it's like when you first get to speak to your significant other, like that's when I realized, okay, now I get what all those other modules for. And then I said, oh, well, if it's going to be like this the rest of the time, then I know I'm in a good spot.
Yeah. And I talk about this with James quite a bit. And James, I want to hear your thoughts here because so for people who are not in the program, the first two modules are really about reintroducing the ways to learn for you. And the reason why we do this is, there's a reason why we enroll the people we do, meaning the people we enroll, they're very successful in their jobs, like Eric is, or James was, right? And I say was because now James works for us. So yeah, the old job. But learning hard skills, learning business skills, learning work skills is a very different skill set and process and mindset and methodology than learning soft skills. And there's a reason why a lot of us are 35, 40, 45 years old and we haven't learned the soft skills that we needed to learn is because we haven't primed our learning for that. So the reason why we reintroduce you to learning is because that's crucial, as Eric said. And the next few modules is about really getting rid of your victim mindset, untethering. And the reason why we do this is because, if you haven't really untethered, if you haven't really gotten rid of your victim mindset, you can learn scripts, you can learn what to say, but you will butcher the heck out of what you say. Nothing you say will come out genuine. It will be very ineffective. It might even hurt you more than it helps. Did you have certain moments that made you realize, Eric? Because you said, like, when I learned the TTH, that was when I realized how important the internal stuff was and the basic stuff was. Did you have a moment where you used, for example, the TTH and you saw it backfire? Maybe not badly, but you saw it backfire a bit and you think, okay, now it clicks.
No, it was actually the opposite. I used the TTH and it worked. And that's when I said, oh, I'm onto something here.
Now I understand why it worked.
Like it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It wasn't like it worked. It was more of like her response to the TTH was something along the lines of like, well, wow, that's very honest of you that you don't know what to say. You're not, because I would make stuff up. That was part of her thing with me, would be like, you don't know the answer, but you're very easily going to make something up and make it sound good. And then everybody believes you. But in this instance, I retreated inwards and I just said, like, I don't know how I feel. Said the TTH. She goes, wow, that's very honest of you. Like, okay. And conversation over. And I was like, wow, but that's the moment when I realized, okay, like I really wanted to keep going, but obviously we get told time and time again, do not go further in the program than where you are. So otherwise I would use logic and try and explain to her why she shouldn't leave and all this stuff. But that in and of itself really gave me the foundation to be like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah. The other thing I want to kind of get out there too is, if you have applied for a program before, you'll know that it's not like you go to the application call and then you just get in the program. Usually Jason or whoever's onboarding you will kind of coach you a little bit because, you can see, Eric, like sometimes people, even after going through that ringer, they still join the program and they still skip the basics because they don't see the importance of the basics like you felt in the beginning, and they kind of skip it and then they start learning the stuff to say without the basics, and that ends up being a disaster. But there is a sense of sometimes people don't know they're shooting themselves in the foot, by skipping the basics, but they are shooting themselves in the foot. And that's really why so if you're right now applying for the program and you're being coached by one of my team members before you can join the program, you're maybe thinking like, why the fuck are they going through this with me? Like, I'm ready right now. Like, let me in, shut up and take my money kind of thing. The reason why is we will not take your money unless we know you are receptive enough so that you can be coached. Because sometimes your resistance is not even overt. It's not even obvious to you. Now, to that end though, you obviously felt that resistance in the beginning where you don't understand what was happening, but you did it anyway. What were you telling yourself in that sense of like, what made you kept doing what you're doing? Because if you were like most men, like me, for example, if I don't see how wax on, wax off leads to me being a fucking karate kid, right? Sorry for cussing under your question.
That doesn't bother me, dude.
I'm not going to do it if I don't know what wax on, wax off is for. But what made you kept going?
I knew, well, I told you before I had only watched a couple of your like the YouTube videos, but once you get into the program, there's like a Loom library basically with just a bunch of calls from before. So I kind of dug into those anytime I had questions. And what really helped were videos kind of like this where you do midway points or then when somebody gets their outcome. So to be perfectly honest, in the beginning, even though you said don't focus on the outcome, all I focused on was the outcome and was like, I have to do this to get the outcome. And that's just where I started. Like, to be transparent, I was like, I want to get to an outcome. They said do this, so I just kept doing it. And it took me, I think, 3 or 4 weeks to get out of doing my first iteration of the victim mindset worksheet. It took me a long time because every time I would resubmit it, the coaches would be like, this isn't 10x better. And I'd be like, all right, well, what is 10x better? So then I would do it again. It's not 10x better. And I was on, I think, 9 iterations before it finally clicked to where I was like, okay, this is what a good product looks like. And then it's like, but you're not done, right? Now you have to, in P2, you're going to be doing, ASs and everything else. So really it was the first initial bit was just me wanting that outcome so bad and just trusting in the process that this is what was going to get me there. It wasn't until later when I realized, oh, the shifts, internal shifts. But in the beginning, I probably did exactly opposite of what you're supposed to do, which is not focus on the outcome. That was all I was focused on and just figured it's this or nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to go join another program. Like, this has got to work. But there were so many good testimonial videos that you did with guys who had like actually sitting there with their spouses. And I'm like, this isn't BS. This has to be legit. I may not know how it's going to work yet, but it's got to be legit.
It's funny because I think if you were to ask me honestly, if I sat with a version of myself 10 years ago, so my early 20s self, would I even understand my program right from the get-go? I don't think that guy would. And I think the problem there is not that like the program is taught in such a disorganized way. I think if you look back, we do tell you from the very beginning, like, here's how everything connects together, but emotionally it just doesn't resonate because, and I'm gonna attribute this back to why you probably got blindsided, is that our ideas of what a relationship is supposed to be and what it takes to save a relationship, what it takes to create a good relationship, what it takes to be the right kind of man. This program is so different than any other commonly accepted ideas that you might have. And so in order for you to understand this program, you almost need to have a complete openness to a complete paradigm shift. Because if you use your current paradigms to view this program, you will just twist and bend it and you won't get it. Did you feel that? Or how did that thinking look like in your head?
So I didn't try to bend it, but I fell for a lot of traps, meaning I think it's P1, M7, so long later on in the first phase where you learn about the DODs, right? The disguises of desire. I was falling for a lot of those in the beginning and not knowing that I was falling for. Big one for me was urgency. All I knew is that she goes, November, right before my birthday, like, we want a divorce. But I'll give you till January 1 to get your stuff together, and then we're starting the process, because she's like, your family's coming over. So basically, I didn't join. I think actually, you asked me when did I join. I think I joined January 17th, but I didn't actually start doing the process until like early February. So all I knew was I was running out of time. And so if she was going to move out, she's already looking at apartments and move on. All I knew was I have to get through this as fast as possible. But I also know I can't just let things slide. That just might be my own personal thing, but I'm not going to half-ass something. I'm going to do it correct, which is why I had so many submissions for the iterations in the beginning. But I just knew internally, I was like, I can't half-ass this. Like this has to be real and it has to be genuine. And I don't quite get it, but I know I need to do it.
Mm.
So I didn't really, try to fit in with my old way of doing things. I just fell for a lot of traps. I fell
Yeah.
for a lot of the disguises.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Go
one of
ahead.
the beautiful things about the program, right? Is like I think that as people join, like I feel like there's a cycle, right? Where everybody sort of goes through, and Eric's seen it as a member watching new people join. We all go through that phase. I had a very similar story to Eric where I was falling for urgency illusion. I was the opposite of Eric. I was a bad student. I tried to rush ahead. I skipped things, got to the point, and then I ended up having to restart. So I ended up costing myself more time by doing that. But I think we all learn kind of one or two ways. Either we rush forward and we say, hey, wait, what about this isn't working? Oh, it's me. And then we get that hard realization and that pain that, okay, now I need to do it the right way. Or like how Eric with the TTH, where you get that success and you get that moment where, you know what, this really lands. And I think for the success for me was like the auto suggestions when I first got rid of one of those victim mindsets. And this was the first time where I didn't feel like, you know what, I want to blame somebody else for this all the time. And that was gone. And I didn't feel that anymore. And that made me really want to double down and work even harder because that was just such an amazing weight lifted off of my shoulders. So I
Mm.
think that everybody sort of has to go through that process on their own. And I think that's why the screening process kind of works the way it does, because to even get to that point, you have to sort of prepare yourself a little bit before you can even do that, right? It's a very give and take situation where if you were to come in and invite me raw without having kind of coached me up with Jason and things like that, it would have been a disaster. I wouldn't have been ready to learn anything.
It's a culture shock. I think it's the best way to describe it. It's almost like if you're never started a business before and suddenly you join an entrepreneurship group, they just talk differently, they think differently, they dress differently, they have different vibes, they have different auras about them. There's different norms of like what's good, what's bad, and a lot of it is very intangible. A lot of it is very you can't describe it, but you know something feels off. Like we're in the UK right now, right? And it took us about 2 weeks to get into the culture of UK people, their humor, etc. And we couldn't describe what that difference was, but we felt something was disconnected, kind of thing. And I think when you are faced with that moment in the program where you're like, okay, this is a very different world, um, some people will get turned off by that and say, like, you know what, let me just table this program first. Let me take another program that is more familiar to me, sounds more right to me until that one fails. Because by definition, guys, if you join a program and that program feels right to you, you've joined the wrong one because then it's not different enough to who you are by definition. So you just got scammed kind of thing. So by definition, if you go to something familiar that fails, that pain kind of teaches you more and you go, okay, maybe this is the way. Or some people go in there and go, okay, a lot of people have gone success here. I don't know what I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my sense of right and wrong is wrong. So let me adopt a new one. So it really depends where you are, kind of thing. But it is a culture shock, and I have to give every member who joins them like I feel you, because if I did my own program, I'd be like, what the fuck? This is so different than Corey Wayne or Casey Zander or Andrew Tate or any book I've read. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
But everything in life is like that. I think pain is like our greatest teacher, first of all. Without that pain, I wouldn't have pushed through. If I was like, if I was indifferent and been like, you know what, yeah, this marriage sucked and like I want out, I wouldn't have pushed through all the pain. But I mean, I had sleepless nights. I couldn't eat. Like it affected me physiologically too. It wasn't just mentally and emotionally. So like to me, I was like, well, that means that I'm not going to lose her. Like I will do whatever it takes. But I knew after again the first few modules that I'm like, this has nothing to do with her. And so deep down, I find out later she wanted that connection to happen where I was focusing on me because she felt like she had been growing and I hadn't grown at all. So that was kind of good in the sense because if it's not difficult, then there's not enough learning lessons there, right? So the program being difficult, which I know it's easy in a sense when you look back, but in the beginning, if it's not difficult, like you said, you're not going to push through and get that breakthrough because breakthrough always comes after suffering in my experience.
But I'm curious for your scenario because your wife was right in a sense of you're a good looking guy, you're young, you're successful, you are by any definition of like the traditional male, you're a high value male.
I thought so.
So why didn't you take that route of, yeah, this is not that important. I can find another one. There's another bus in 5 minutes kind of thing. Because why did you take this route? Because I just made a video on this just to make sure I gave enough context here is when you go through a very tough moment, that's a pivotal moment that gives you two options. Either you say, fuck it, fuck everything. I will go somewhere that I'm appreciated because I'm good enough as myself and not even look at and introspect about your issues. Or you take the pill and you say, let me introspect about where my issues are and let me work on it, regardless of whether this is my fault or not. What made you choose that harder route than the easy route of like just saying fuck it?
It's a good question, and I asked myself that too. So like before I joined the program, I went out on New Year's Eve, took my ring off, and went out with some friends. And I had a very deep contemplation that evening, going just to myself, thinking like, why do I love her so much to where this is like killing me inside? And is it because I have this dream and this hope of what our life could be like? Or is it like a genuine love that I'm not willing to give up? And my answer was, it's a genuine love and I'll fight for her. But if I'm 100% a new Eric, if I'm 100% a new me and she still chooses to leave, then at least I did everything that I could.
Mm.
So I knew that somehow, some way that this program, and it was again my last chance, if you will, because like, again, I'm on a time limit in my mind, even though that time box wasn't real. It was in my mind, it was real. And she kept verbalizing it. And I didn't know about resistance then. So I just took it as gospel that that's what was going to happen. But I made the decision, like, if I can actually get to the best me I can be, and then she still chooses to leave, then cool. But I'm not going to leave this unfinished. Like, I'm going to do whatever I need to do. And that might just be a personality type, but that's just who I am. Like, again, if I put my mind to something, it's done no matter what. And let the outcome be what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah. I think that's actually the topic of the first episode with the podcast with my wife that we're slowly launching is like because she works with a lot of female entrepreneurs, and she's noticed like there is the number one factor that she looks at or who she works with and doesn't want to work with is whether they choose like what they do when they realize their outcome or their life is not what they want to be, where they want to be, and where do they look at? Do they look externally or do they look internally? The people who look externally, they will sound like they're smart and they will convince you that they're smart and they're good, but everybody there knows they're not, kind of thing. And so, and when you want to admit so badly that you're good enough already, you ironically just told the world that you have stopped growing. And we don't know when you stopped growing, but you just told the world that you were not really that valuable. But it's the people who are not afraid to admit that I'm wrong, or I messed up, or I fucked up, or I'm not as good as I think. Those are the people with high potential. And so we agreed we don't look at people for who they are today. We look at people for who they can become. Your value is not who you are today. Your value is your potential. But be careful of what you say and think, because what you say and think can really destroy your potential in a way, right? And I think you are a kind of person who's basically saying like, every tough moment that I get, I'm going to milk every lesson out of that I can. because that's the moment where the lessons can be milked, kind of thing. So I don't care if this is my wife's fault or not. I don't even know. That's irrelevant to me. All I care about is how can I milk as much value and as much growth from this moment as possible, which is an amazing mindset to have.
It's a learned skill too, because as a child from like 3 to 7, I had leukemia. So when I was living in the hospital and having cancer, like that was a moment in time when I think I learned that skill, as young as that sounds, because I didn't have a choice. Like you're fighting for your life. There are other kids around you that are fighting for their lives too. And that was just kind of the way of life. But it built this like we use the term bulletproof vest. It was kind of like that internally, just as a human, where I was like, well, dude, if I can withstand that, then I can beat anything. And that's where it kind of is a double-edged sword, because later in life, I started experimenting with drugs, thinking, well, I'm indestructible. And so it was really honestly a life-changing moment in this program for me, because it blended those both two together. Like, yes, you can be indestructible, and yes, you can have both of those things, but at the same time, you have to know exactly who you are, who you want to become, and never stop growing. Because I was a big procrastinator. So even though I thought I was growing, the business is growing, I wasn't growing as a husband. I wasn't growing as a man who can be in touch with his emotions. And so all those things to my wife was like, well, look, I'm growing exponentially and you're just staying the same. Those old mindsets will not take us to where we need to go. And my life is too valuable. I have too many things important to do. I'm okay with leaving you behind because I gave you chance after chance. I didn't see those chances. In hindsight, I see them. But yeah, it takes a lot for that mindset to form. But yes, in the pain and in the suffering is where I look now. And I say one thing more than anything now. I say interesting, because that's part of the program, right? Like she's picked up on that, because anytime something happens, I just go interesting.
Interesting.
And I go right in there to think like, okay, why did that happen? And so that's our new word of the
relationship.
That's in our in the relationship. Yeah.
So let's get into how your ideas of being a man have changed. Because that's, I think, if I were to ask you back again the question, like, what was the biggest difference between Headman and my program, is that, I think our ideas of what it means to be a high value man is very, very different, inside and out too. And I find it interesting that you went into Headman first, and that was traditionally the more red pill, the more traditional definitions of what it means to be a high value man. And then you saw mine, and then you chose my version of what it means to be a high value man. While a lot of people who follow Headman, Casey Zander, would say, I'm teaching men how to be cucks, how to be simps, how to be weak men. So can you talk about your journey of how your definitions have changed and evolved over time into where it is today?
Yeah, there's a ton of principles to hit that, but the one that stands out the most is I forget what it's called, but there's a pyramid of value, right? I thought I was providing the highest level of value, which was safety. I've trained Stephanie on how to shoot guns, and I'm talking physical first. Physical was always my first thing. So physical safety was like our house is secure, alarm system, training. I do a lot of firearm training. And then the second thing would be financial, right? Like you want for nothing, not like we still have a lot of room to grow in the wealth area, but we're good to where we're not suffering, right? We used to be extremely poor. Now we're not. So there's a big shift. So I'm like, check. Those are my 2 check boxes. I didn't really have a whole lot of other check boxes, but looking on the pyramid of value, and I'm sure you can tell everybody the name of it because it slipped my mind, but that's the lowest level of value. Like clothes, your lowest level of need is sitting there at the bottom, and that's all I was providing. So women, what I've learned in the program, can get that anywhere. It doesn't matter. Like they can almost get that on their own, right? Because a lot of women can be extremely successful. And to me, that's where a lot of the mindset for me shifted on what high value actually means. Because to me, it's like being in tune with who I am as a human and being happy with who I am as a person, and being able to explain that and understand the other person's point of view and actually just have a simple emotional conversation that didn't exist in our relationship ever. Like she would ask me questions about cancer as a kid. I would ignore it. We would talk a little bit about addiction because that was kind of part of both of our backgrounds, but it was never super deep. It was always surface level, or war stories is what we call it, where you tell about the crazy time where you got arrested because of XYZ. So it was like there's so many things that were surface level, but there was not deep. And I believe a high value man can get in touch with all of those things and not be ashamed of it and know how to control it. And that's what the program taught me how to do, was control my internals to where all the things that I used to believe I can change, and turning it into reflexive paradigm, meaning I get to choose how I feel about a situation, and I get to choose how I feel about a situation and be able to articulate that to my significant other and understand what she's going through, because I'm able to antithetically understand where she's coming from. To me, that's a high value man. Forget, everybody can do the other stuff, but not many men can actually do that and get in touch internally.
So the pyramid that Eric is talking about is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which if you take basic psychology, you should be able to like know what that is or find that. But like, so that alone is not new, but the way I always talk to people about it is, so because like we work with a lot of rich people. My wife's parents are actually very wealthy. They're like multiple nine figures wealthy kind of thing, but they have a lot of marriage issues too. And her dad is always wanting to like work more and grow the business more, because that's how he defines his value. Is like, if he stops the business, I think he would have an identity crisis kind of thing. And the question I asked him one time was like, so okay, so let's look at the lower values here. You have your security needs, you have your financial needs. You create like $100 million, whatever it is, right? How many men can give the same security needs, financial needs that you have given? Maybe not to the same extent as like 200 million, but like enough to where your wife would feel that safety financially. A lot of men can give that safety. To be honest, like beyond making like 200 grand a year, probably your life making more than that doesn't really change your life that much. Like you don't create incrementally more safety with the more millions you make. It's like, yeah, a lot. So how high value can it be when that value you're giving is found everywhere? By definition, right? If you buy a watch, that watch cannot be high value if it's like everyone's wearing it. If everyone's wearing an Apple Watch, it cannot be that high value. The high value thing is like when it's very rarely found. So how many people can you find that can create this higher level value? It's very rare, right? But you see like so many men just talking about that lower pillar still. They're talking about like get money, look good, go to the gym, whatever it is. And to be honest, at some point it doesn't really matter. And I think that's another example of what made you blindsided a bit, because you didn't know the need to create a higher pillars was even a thing. And so because you cannot define that problem, you're like, what problem? Did you feel that?
100%. Yeah. It wasn't until I looked at what self-actualization means, like empowering, I realized through our entire relationship, she was empowering me, but I was not empowering her to the same level or even anywhere close. And to me, she was able to have my back when I went through ups and downs. Everybody in entrepreneurship goes through ups and downs, and the downs can be really low. And it's all on you, right? And you're providing for a brand new spouse, and you're like, it's all on me. And the pressure can be thick and it sucks. But when you have someone who has your back that way and saying, you be the best you and do what you think is right, through the ups and downs, you're able to get through it. And it's mostly in part because you have that support. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it on your own, but it does help to have someone who loves you and says, like, you can do this, right? Go after it. And I realized that I was not that way to her, because again, she's in the in the Christian spiritual side, and does her own entrepreneurship and does her own speaking and her own live work with women. So like she has her own thing going on, but uh, I never gave it the credit that I think it deserved. And so I had to really look at myself deep internally and be like, I have to own it. And we can get into this later on in like the paraphrasing and campaigns and stuff. But once I actually started to communicate that, she was actually kind of taken back because she's like, well, I never thought you would admit that, because
That's a
it was something I
wonderful.
never did.
And let me give you an analogy that I just recently realized myself, right? It's because, okay, let's look at your value as a business, for example, right? I think a lot of discourse around high value revolves around the question of like how high, how much is the net worth of my business, right? But we don't ask, okay, in order for your business to have high net worth, it needs to create a lot of value for other people,
Right.
right? So a lot of men, they just try to figure out like, okay, how can my business make more money? But they don't think about, but their way of making money is almost a lot of taking away from other people, not creating value, right? And so if you look at a lot of the conversations, right, it's like for you, for example, and back then, your wife was there for you, but you never thought about how can I be there for her.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife was almost there to serve you, the building of your value in a way. But to me, the definition of value is how much value can you give? That's the intrinsic value of value. So if you are a man who just takes and takes, but you cannot give value to your woman, the higher level values too, then how can you be high value? You are a
Correct.
mafia. You are a mobster. You are, you're just taking away value. That's not a business that I would want to have.
Correct. Energy sucker is what she calls them. You suck
Energy
people's
sucker.
energy out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the flaw of all of like those sort of like the red pill theories and the coaching programs that teach you like tactics and tricks. I think it's like the pickup artist programs and stuff like that, right? Like, sure, with money and a nice car and things like that, could you get a woman to date you or have sex with you? Yes, you could definitely do that. But keeping that person long term and creating a real relationship with them, you've got no fucking chance if that's all you're offering. Like you're not bringing anything to the table that like Geoffrey said, that 4 million other guys can't do the exact same thing. You don't have a value proposition. And that's the same thing with companies, right? There's businesses out there that you can go to that'll take and take and take, and you can spend money there, sure. But if they don't give the product and make it worthwhile and make it valuable to you to go there, they're going to die off quickly because they just drain and they don't add anything. You have to have the ability to add value.
And a lot of people will say to
Yeah.
this one, right? So, but the relationship is not like a business. Yeah, you're right. It's different in a sense that this is higher stakes. Like you are asking your partner to choose to spend her one on one life with you. Like when you want an employee to work for you, you're not talking like 5, 10 years. You're not talking for the whole lifetime. They will eventually retire too, but this is higher stakes. So, if all the more reason you have to create even more value kind of thing. If you want someone to just say like I'm never going to look anywhere else, you have to create a lot more value. And I think also it reveals a lot, I think, because the reason why we get called cucks a lot, right? It's like we have this mentality of doesn't matter if your wife is having an affair, when she wants divorce, whatever it is, you still need to look inside. Because yes, your wife's affair is a betrayal, but maybe there was an earlier betrayal that you have done that you don't know about that actually was a bigger betrayal often in a lot of ways than the affair than you think, right? Maybe you have betrayed the relationship, you have betrayed her a long time ago. So I was talking with this guy and he's like, oh, my wife had an affair. Okay, so let's go backwards 5 years, 6 years. Okay, so here's what you gave your wife. You gave your wife none of the higher pillars. You gave your wife some of the lower pillars, right? And so you have asked your wife to basically like dedicate her one-on-one life to you, and your wife had these dreams when she was younger about like meeting this Prince Charming and this amazing thing, and the relationship you gave her fell very short of it. And not only did it fall very short of it, every time she wants to express to you that she feels unhappy, you make her feel guilty for feeling unhappy. You don't think that's a betrayal? You know? And so it's very telling, I think, when people are having affairs, whatever it is, when they respond to that by saying, fuck my wife, screw her, that mentality shows me a lot about how they handle difficult conversations in many, many instances in the past. And they just showed me that they've probably betrayed their relationship long, long ago, and they don't even know it. Kind of thing. Because like you said, the biggest, if you want to create the high level values, you need to have that compassion. You need to have that understanding. You need to have that internal skill to not be so selfish, to put yourself in other people's shoes. Right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I didn't really realize that until later on in the program, but I never really blamed her for anything. Like the equal blame illusion wasn't on the super high on my list, but I definitely looked at it in terms of where am I lacking, right? What don't I have? Because once I got to that position of realizing that I was not empowering her at all, I was like, well, there's got to be things that I'm missing inside of me, and they're all stemmed from the P1 and P2 stuff, meaning everything in the program builds on itself. So once I got to that point where I was like, okay, I haven't been providing this value. I've basically been pushing her away in a sense. Then I started in hindsight to realize, oh yeah, I was screwing up in so many different areas in the past, but it didn't click until then. I thought I was being that high value man. I thought that I was able to deliver the value that she needed, but it turns out, at least in my case, she didn't want the value that I was bringing. When she came over, when we first met, she's from Ireland and I'm from California. We met in Los Angeles, and she told me, she goes, I felt like I was in a Hollywood movie. So it wasn't like my game was on point. It was just like a new experience. And so, like you said, Prince Charming, that's literally what it felt like for her in the beginning. And then she realized, oh, his family's crazy. He's off his rocker. And so, but she goes, I'll push through. So she had, to her, been pushing through for 9 years. Who wants to live a life where you're pushing through to survive? Right. And so come to find out later, she was like, yeah, for like the last 2 years, I knew you were dead weight. And I was just waiting for the moment.
Yeah.
And that's how blunt it came out. And I'm going, okay. So I had, that all ties into the value where I was like, I thought I'd been doing everything right. Apparently not.
Because we have so many conversations with people. Like we've enrolled a lot of people, and every single time I can tell you that someone comes to us with like a holier than thou attitude where they are convinced like they've tried everything.
Right.
We always just ask them a few questions. We ask them like, number one, okay, tell me exactly what is this improvement, this value that you think you're giving? Immediately, it's very evident it's like either low level values or the wrong kinds of values that is valuable to them, what they think of value, but it's not really valuable to their partners, kind of thing. Right? So it's a selfish value. There's always like the other side to it. So that's all we can say. Is like, even if you're having an affair, sure, it's easy to have the narrative right now that like she's the asshole. But is she really? If you look at it objectively, you know, I don't know. The other thing about this value thing that is interesting to go into is also how, like you said, a lot of approaches take the top down approach of like focusing on passion first and then safety later. Even some people even say like, if you fix the sex, you fix everything. What's absurd about that for you?
We kind of already touched on it, but if you want to go through the pillars, I mean, to me, like when I said the program builds on itself, it's not just like the modules, but emotional safety. If it's not there, then there's nothing else that you can do. What I mean by that is, my first goal was to make her feel safe. I thought that she was safe. I thought, again, going back to value, emotional safety does not mean that she doesn't feel safe in her environment. It means she doesn't feel emotionally safe in her environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, she couldn't talk to me because she couldn't trust me that I could handle my own emotions. So, if I'm trying to go to get her in bed or fix any kind of sexual problems, our sex life was never an issue. It was always that I wasn't able to emotionally connect. So I had to first determine, well, where am I lacking? And fill in those gaps so that all I need to do initially was just make her feel emotionally safe. But I had spent the last 9, or I guess call it 11 years, being emotionally distant. So I'm trying to rush this process of trying to say, hey, be emotionally safe. Look how great I am now. And she's going, you have 11 years to make up, or even just call it 9. And I'm thinking I'm going to get this done in like 30 days or something. Like how long does it take to create emotional safety? Months. And that's on the slow end
Yeah, I had
or
a
the
different
fast
problem
end.
than you because my problem was, and I don't know about your problem, James, but like my problem was I didn't have the sexual passion too. I think we had it in the beginning, and everything just fell fucking apart. And for me, I've realized that like even to sexual attraction and sexual passion, safety is a big part of it. So you can discuss it in two angles, right? So we talk about like high value man, whatever it is. And we talk about, for example, a lot of men having cars, money, power, looking good, gym, six pack abs, muscular, whatever it is, as like, oh, if you have that, you will attract women. True, you will attract women, but it's not those things that attracts women. It's what those things imply, what those things
Mm.
symbolize, right? And I think if you were to take like a microscope to a woman's mind, what she's thinking is, oh, this person has enough discipline and masculine energy to stick with it in the gym, to build a business, to go through the hardships of business, to build something, career, whatever it is.
Mm.
If he can do that, he must be able to do that for me in the relationship. But that's not always true, right? It
Mm.
doesn't always translate to the relationship. And so that's when I think we women get attracted at first, but then once they realize that the stuff that they have, the manifestations that they have is not bred from safety, ability to create actual safety, emotional safety, they're like, oh, I'm turned off. Do you think that was what was happening in your relationship too? Can you sense that in yours? And James, if you can sense that too?
Yeah, I think initially the sexual passion died out, in my opinion. And I want to rephrase how I kind of stated that. When I say like the sexual passion wasn't an issue, what I mean is it wasn't like our driving focus. But again, we were starting to try and have kids and be on a schedule. And I think that in and of itself might eliminate some sexual passion because you're like, okay, now's the day, now's the time, instead of it being spontaneous. But moving in towards, I guess when I look in hindsight, moving towards the day where she was like, hey, this is it, there was a lackluster. She didn't even want to kiss at that point, like right before. So this is before she even wanted to drop the bomb. That's when it kind of triggered me. It's very odd for 2 weeks to not even, be intimate of some kind. It was unusual. So my thought is, and I got this out of her later when we were having a conversation about it, that she felt like she was doing her wifely duties,
Hmm.
not wanting to be sexually passionate with me. But she did her wifely duties because she was like, yeah, we enjoy it and our sex is great, but it's not like I was eager to do that like it was in the beginning, right? And so now, if I can skip forward a little bit, I've realized, like, just this is my choice, that I wanted to build every pillar from the ground up. So like we've both agreed that we're not going to rush into every single pillar, especially sexual passion, until we've built every single foundation that goes below that. And so far, it's been great because now I don't know if you want to jump into this now, but it's just been different because we're able to communicate each thing and actually know that we're connecting on a level that we've never connected like that before. It's,
Actually, we forgot to get into that because
yeah.
we usually get into that earlier, but I mean, we jump back into the main topic of this high value thing. Uh,
And
how
I
is it
think
like now, by the way? Like, what's the status now? What's it like now for you?
So about 6 months in to my process, I started seeing what we call the weather change and the climate change a little bit. Still very distant. We ended up about actually on July 18th of 2024. So we're talking February, March, April, May, June, July. Yeah, 6 months in. She was dead set on getting a divorce. It was still there. And at that point in time, I was learning how to campaign. I was at a place where we were able to have deep conversations. It came out that I kept thinking that she was having an affair. Turns out she wasn't, but she was definitely wanting to pursue someone else. So she describes it to me as though, like, she goes, well, I didn't want to have an affair because that's obviously unbiblical. So, like, I'm not going to let something like sex drive me to make a decision. But at the same time, she's like, I just knew I needed to get away from you. So we ended up actually getting officially divorced on our 10-year anniversary. So on July 18th is when the paperwork went through. And biblically, in numerology, if you will, the number 10 means completion, but it also means new beginning. So what I said to her was like, look, if you still want to go through this with this, like, I 100% back you, and you'll never have to worry about, finances or what. I went into this thing where I was being very genuine. Like, if that's what you want, I empower you to do it. And she goes, okay. She's like, well, okay. She was surprised. She did it. She came home that same day and said, I don't know if this was the right decision. And that's when I knew, okay, maybe there's just some confusion going on whether or not it was the right thing. But she goes, I just have to do it for myself. I made a commitment to myself to finish this thing off. She goes, I see your changes. And to be honest, I even trust you again, but I need to do this for me. And so she finalized it. But from that day forward, it was weird. It was like things started to shift even more in a positive direction because I didn't stop. It wasn't like my outcome goal was to not get divorced. At that point, I had built up so much internal shifts to where I was like, that's not that doesn't matter. I don't care how the government classifies us. I know what I'm fighting for. And I let her know that very explicitly. And she could see, like, wow, he's still fighting, even though we're at this place. And so, long story short, I just kept I'm still doing the process today. It's not like I'm at a final destination, but to give you some kind of context, we just went on our first vacation again together as a couple to Mexico, had a great week. Got to a place where we were like starting to engage a lot more on the physical sense, but also emotionally. We haven't had an argument, a fight. It's been like, we literally look at each other kind of like, wow, this is like two different people. And I told her, I just want to explore the new you, and I want you to explore the new me. So every time something comes up where she'll reference, I use old Eric and new Eric a lot in our conversations to differentiate the two, as they are two different people, because I do feel like a different guy. And that's become our new language. And we've been in a really much better place so far.
And for people who are like label Nazis, rings back on. I hear. Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's weird because we are officially divorced. I do not wear my ring all the time. And it's just because I got used to not wearing it. And so she put it back on not too long ago. I would say maybe in the last, I don't know, 2 months, I'll say, give or take. And I think it's because it's a really nice ring. That's why I thought at first. I'm like, she just wants to wear it. I swear to God, that's what I thought. I was like, she just wants, so we went to the mall one day and she was like wearing it. First time, again, since November, long time. I noticed it. I didn't say anything. And I needed to get this watch actually, a link taken out. So we went into a jewelry store and she goes, hey, can I figure out how to get this ring on my left hand fitted for my right hand? And I think she was expecting a reaction out of me. And I'm like, no, let's go find out how much it costs. Like, it's a nice ring. Just wear it, And She go, oh, maybe another time. And that was the last I've heard of the ring on the right hand, and it's just stayed on the
On the
left.
left hand.
And so when we go out to, we found a new church, we found a new gym, we basically changed up everything. But once she started asking me to go out to find a new church and to do these things, that's when I knew, I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel like what I thought it was going to feel like. I thought I was going to be filled with like this joyous occasion of like reconciliation. I don't think that's, you can call it reconciliation. I don't call it that. I call it like a brand new beginning and a second chance. And so yeah, I've been treating it as such. And like I'm still working every day on the DPPs. I still need to grow, and I look at it as a lifelong thing. But yeah, it has been a complete 180 in terms of our connection,
Yeah.
just as two people.
And I want to
living in
transition
Honestly.
into that too, where we talk about like your love for the process intrinsically as well. But I just want to make sure that people look at that story and make some connections. Like what Eric was saying about like, hey, I never made a connection to like this part of the Bible to like this thing. I just want to make you make some connections to some of the things I say, which is that one, resistance and divorce can be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Mm.
Number two is that uh, when you get intense resistance, that is actually your partner watching what you do next. And if you crumble during that resistance, you just confirm to your partner that that was the right choice. If you do not crumble, you just confirm to your partner that, ooh, or you made a doubt basically about like, who, I don't know. The other thing that the third thing that I want you to realize here is I always say that the resistance must happen. So, for example, your partner said, as a matter of principle for me, I need to get divorced.
Mm.
Because if she, let's say, an alternate reality said to you, okay, fine, let's not get divorced, she cannot now look at your changes and go, are the changes because they're real or because I chose to not get divorced? Like if I chose to get divorced, would he still do this? Right? That will always be like iffy in her mind. So that's
The
why
what
again,
if.
the what if, right? And if in the first episode of the podcast too, we talked to my wife. It's like I asked her, what made you decide to stick with me? Is because she said, even though I gave you nothing, you still kept on with it. That is when I knew the changes was going to be permanent because it was unconditional at that point. So we get so many people who come to us and they say, and they panic about like, oh, my wife is getting divorced right now. What should I do right now? To be honest, let it happen.
Mm.
There's nothing you can do now. In fact, if you try to stop it, you are going to make it happen even faster.
Mm.
Like it's
That's
kind of
100%
funny.
fact. Yeah.
And so
It
we never
actually
get
brings me.
worried. Everyone's like always like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's like, don't worry. If you have the right changes, if you learn how to thrive in resistance, divorce will be the best thing that have ever happened to you. Mark my words. In a year or two, you will laugh at this and say, wow, kismet. I'm glad that happened, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, and actually, I think you went so far in the other direction of that, Eric, where you were so effusive in pursue making her wanting to pursue other goals. There was one point that we actually had to have a coaching call with you because you put in, you're like, yeah, I think she should go and date this other person. She doesn't really want to. She keeps telling me that she kind of is happy and talking to me now, but I really want her to go do it. And I was like, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? Like
That's not
she's
what
clearly,
empowerment means.
you were like,
I
Empowerment
think
is
it was about
"Ah,
the moving out. She
yeah, I
was so
think,
adamant
yeah.
about moving, and she's like, "Oh, I like this apartment and this apartment," and I'm going like, "Cool, if you can do the rent and like, I'm, we're splitting all the assets. You're gonna have hundreds of thousands. Like, go do what you want to do." And then, but I got to the point where I was getting like the urgency a little bit creeped in, and then my idea of what empowerment meant was way off. And so you and Sabor had to like rein me back in and be like, dude, do not do that. That is not a good idea, because like let her make the decision on her own. You don't need to force her into a decision.
But
And so
that
that was
transitioned
a
me
big
to
deal.
another point that I think a common misconception people have, because like when you people, especially like red pill people, hear me say you got to create emotional safety, it sounds very pansy, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're just saying, oh, let whatever things happen, let whatever your wife say whatever she wants, agree to whatever your wife wants. By definition, for people who are listening to this, right, it's like your partner can never feel safe with you if you're a fucking pansy. That's not what we're saying, right? So when we're saying like empower your partner, it's not empowering your partner to just go away and like date other people. It's not what we're saying.
Right.
What we're saying is like understand what your partner is trying to tell you and empower her to have that freedom to be like, you're not stuck with me. You're not my property. You don't have to just do whatever you want to do. So if you want to do what I tell you to do, fine. But if you want to do what against what I want to tell you to do, go ahead. You have the freedom of choice. That's it.
Yep. And that's backwards from how my mind worked initially. Because I'm thinking, again, going back to the Christian side of things, like, well, wait a minute, that's against religion. That's against everything that we believe in. That's this and this and this. It's like, but wait a minute. No, she's a grown ass woman. Like she's an adult. She can do what she wants. And that's where I learned in the program about interdependence. That's a huge principle. So like if I'm my best self and she's her best self and we're both our best selves for God, then we'll meet in the middle and we'll be good. And if she decides I don't want that, then that's her decision. But I'm not going to force her to do that. And when we talk about the self-actualization and like empowerment, it took me a minute to get that, but the principle itself is quite easy to understand. Like you just explained it perfectly. But when you have certain VMs or DODs that creep into your mind, it's almost like it warps the principle into do what I say, which would be one extreme, or I'm going to make you go get into another relationship to see how great I am and what you're missing. And like you always say, it's like, it's never in the extremes. It's always somewhere in the middle. There's always balance in every right decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a scary thought for the men because like, and giving that your partner that much freedom is scary to a lot of people, I think. And I think it was scary for you. It was scary for me because
Oh yeah.
the answer could be like, yeah, let me give you the freedom. Like we always say to our employees internally too, train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them so well that they don't want to leave.
I lived by that
But
saying.
but funny enough, like you didn't live it in your relationship, and I think a lot of people
Right.
live that in a lot of parts of life, but they don't live that in their relationship, and they treat their women like property, kind of thing, which is sad. And I think it takes a lot of courage for a man to live by that principle in their relationship. I think it's more cowardly for someone to hide behind their mistakes, and when their partners want to leave, they just say like, "Well, it's her fault." Uh, I think that's very cowardly to me.
I agree.
Yeah.
David told me that saying, like let her go, like give her the freedom to leave, but treat her so well she won't want to. And that struck a chord with me because it was almost like a weight lifted off. And that was part of my untethering process, was just receiving that in and of itself. Because I was like, wait a minute, if this program is supposed to make me a 10x me, and my 10x self is not good enough for her, then that's an outcome. But until I'm there getting to my 10x and she explores and comes and finds that I am 10x better, then like there's nothing that can stop me. And so there was this moment when I realized that by letting her go, I'm actually growing myself at the same time.
Mm.
Because without having those internal shifts for me, it would have been impossible for me to actually state that. And so I was able to listen to her about how her interactions with someone else, and even though there was no relationship, it was like her desire to want that was something she had to keep to herself until I created enough safety where she could tell me about it. Once she could tell me about it, it was whether or not my bulletproof vest would stand up to that, knowing that she's not talking about me anymore. She's talking about somebody else. But then you develop the psychological safety. That's when I realized, okay, she's feeling safe enough to talk to me about it. What am I going to do with it? And that's when I think surprised her a little bit, because she was like, wow, you're maturing. Like that's an important piece to this, is that she was actually looking at me as, like we talked about before, baby Christian and mature Christian. I was a baby human, and she was seeing me grow piece by
Yeah.
piece by piece, to where she was like, I'm going to share something that I have never shared with you before. And she called it her dark side. She's like, you never knew this part of me before, because I got saved. We met and we lived this great life. But she goes, this is who I used to be. I was a party girl. I would go out. I was pretty. Like, I could manipulate guys. I could do whatever I wanted to do because that was the lifestyle. And she goes, but you've never seen this part of me. And so when she opened that up to me and I was able to receive it and not make her feel judged, it really opened her. She was like, wow, now I feel safe being able to, because you're not judging me. You're not telling me that I'm bad or some horrible person. You're just listening and trying to understand how I feel. And that's what the paraphrase is all about.
And I think that goes into like a perfect transition to like the FA bias that we learn.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because, you know, I'm under the philosophy in life, I guess, that everyone has a much higher potential than they think they have. So, which is why I even got into this coaching thing, is like, I think everybody has potential. By extension, too, I think every partner has potential. So even if you take a case to me and you tell me like my wife has an affair, I will never say your wife is an asshole. I will never say you're an asshole. I will never say your wife is an asshole. I will always say, yeah, you may have done wrong decisions, but if you learn how to create the right environment for yourself and for your partner, you'd be very shocked as to how much they can blossom.
Yeah.
And the people who go against me on that are usually the people who want so badly for it to be their partner's fault. But the irony they're not seeing often is that, like you said, if you think so badly of your partner, how can you even have created the safety that you think you've created in the first place?
Yeah.
So was all this whole thing where your partner's having an affair and then things are falling apart and then you blaming her, was that really just a self-fulfilling prophecy in the first place? Did you actually give this a shot? That's what I'm wondering sometimes.
Well, so she didn't actually
I know,
have the affair.
yeah, I
She
know for your
wanted to
case it's
have it.
not, but like I'm just
Yeah. Oh, in
extrapolating to
general.
like general things, right? Like making the more extreme cases, I guess. But for yours, right? What I like about your approach was that I think you deep down, you felt like your wife was a good person. She could be a good person. It just took you to understand how to manifest that belief in a proper, healthy way, like proper high value man way.
Yeah.
That finally created safety. But you
Correct.
had to have that belief that like your partner was able to blossom in the first place. If you never had that belief, I don't think you would have ever have pushed yourself to pick the red lane, to pick the difficult path of like choosing this program, to pick the difficult path of fighting for that relationship, to pick the difficult path of going through the many months of like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't know what the fuck this program is trying to get me to do. I'm lost here. You wouldn't have gone through any of that stuff. You wouldn't have gone through the resistance kind of thing.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's one of the crazy things that we see a lot, right? Is that like people come in and you have to believe, like if you want to have a high value partner, you have to be a high value person, right? But if you don't have the faith that your partner's high value and you can't have that belief that my partner is worth it, then why are you with that person in the first place, right? Like it's that incredible disconnect that like what are you really saying about your wife to say that I don't think that she could be the kind of person who would be receptive to me becoming this great kind of emotional leader who can be there for my family and who can make all these eternal shifts. What am I really saying about her if I don't think that she's receptive to that or that she'd be open to being in a relationship with like someone like that? Like I think you have to think about the narrative in your head to say, oh no, I just think that she's a terrible person who wants to leave and it just needs to find somebody else no matter what. I think that like that disconnect and that understanding is one of the huge gaps between people who I think we find have a lot of success versus those who don't have a lot of success.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. If I can get like intimate a little bit. So I never, if I'm being honest, I never truly blamed her character, but what the FAE did for me was my she has a bunch of spiritual gifts. She can see things spiritually that I cannot, right? And I don't mean in some woo-woo way, but meaning like she's helped so many people overcome so many different things, including myself. It without her, I would not have gotten through the addiction that I had. So she just has some, but part of it is stuff that I never quite understood. Even though I was inquisitive, asking questions, I didn't understand a lot of what she had to endure and what she goes through on the daily. And even some of the things that she says just didn't click in my mind.
Mm.
So part of me internally thought she was crazy. And I've told her this, we've laughed about it, but it was just because I was so unaware of her walk that I felt I wouldn't blame her. I don't know if you call that character, maybe you would, but either way, the FAE helped me understand like, okay, take 2 steps back and go, let's just say in a perfect world, she's not crazy. Like, what would she feel like at that moment when I'm thinking that she's crazy and gaslighting her? And that was a big thing that I would do is I would gaslight the heck out. Oh, that didn't happen. Or I know you think you saw that, but this is the reality.
You're dramatizing it. You're like making it sound worse than it is, or that's not exactly what
Exactly.
happened, whatever. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's where the FAE came in for me. And then but what's crazy is on my end is that like once we got to the place that we're at now, I look back and I can see all the times when I thought I could see where I thought that she was nuts. And it turns out that she was just being heard the whole time. And so I had to put myself in her shoes to really figure out what did that feel like when the closest person to you, your only family in the entire United States of America, basically gaslights you and tells you they don't believe you for years and years and years and years, and you're having to do everything, including life, all by yourself. And then I come in thinking, well, I'm giving you a house and you got all this stuff. And she's like, that's the least of my concerns. Do you know what I'm saying? That kind of
Yeah.
goes back to the value thing. So yeah, it was hard for me to do that. But once I did, our communication is because now she goes, you were asleep and now you're awake. She's like, when I tell you things, you actually remember them. You know exactly what I'm saying because you've had to live it and you experienced it. And she goes, finally, you learned how to fight for what you wanted, like the right way. Because I always would pray and fast and all that, but this program to me, in combination with my spiritual beliefs, was like the ultimate method to where I can actually communicate, not just with her, but with anybody and truly understand what they're going through. And that has created so much synergy between us because that never existed before.
Mm. I want to say something controversial here. So feel free to kind of give your thoughts on this too. But I think if my partner would have an affair now, for example, right? I think, and I imagine that conversation, how that would go. I think it would go like it would take a lot of curiosity for me to be able to dive deep and go, okay, I'm gonna assume here that you didn't cheat because you were an asshole. I'm assuming here you're gonna cheat because there was something wrong with the environment, something was terribly wrong that I may not know about, but let me figure out what went wrong from your point of view. Think about, okay, in that conversation, like you said, think about the little amount of FAE bias that will derail that conversation. Like, how many times have you thought, for example, in your life, she's crazy. She's just whatever. And that thought stops you from digging deeper because you're thinking like there's nothing there to be found. I already found the reason, and it's you fucked up. So it's not really like a character issue, but it's just a subtle FA bias will just say, will prevent you from fully understanding someone in the first place. Right. And so the way people respond to their their affair, discovering an affair, or discovering their partner's desire for divorce. And the way they're able to like lean into the reasons tells me so many things about their ability to create safety.
Yeah.
And to go deep into create safety. James had to go, but I think he has some daughter sick. So
Hope she feels better.
Yeah. So it just tells you a lot about how they would react. So like, if you are, let's say right now in a position where your wife wants a divorce or having an affair or one separation, whatever it is you find, pay attention to how you're reacting. And if you're reacting like this, think about how this narrative you have of like, okay, it can't be me, it must be her. Think about how this mindset has probably prevented you from digging deeper to so many parts of her life. In previous conversations, previous arguments. And I think it should be pretty obvious why your wife never felt safe in the first place, kind of thing. And I think it'll be pretty obvious your contribution to the problem at that point.
100%. And looking back, I see time and time again where that was exactly the case. I didn't know how to dig deeper. Like, that's why it's when we talk about everything building on itself, and I keep harping on that because I've been helping a lot of folks, or at least trying to, in the group, who are kind of jumping and wanting to get to maybe the frameworks or whatever and not doing the internals as best as possible. For me, like the internals is what helped me realize all of these realizations so that I could then articulate them correctly in the frameworks with the right what, the right how, and the right why. But all those times in the past where I didn't know how to dig and I didn't even realize there was stuff to dig into, now that's why I like to, when I'm communicating with Steph, I'm like, I get excited and happy because I'm learning about a new person. And her mind is like, I've been this way the whole time. But to me, it's like the veil has been taken off my eyes, and I'm able to see and hear in new ways. And I get giddy and excited, in that new self like that comes out. I mean, I hope she digs it because it's giving us a cool new path, right? Where our communication style is completely different than before. Thing behind the thing, part of our vocabulary. Like most of the terms that I'm learning are in our vocabulary, and we use them in different ways because to her, it's like she connects it to a biblical term and I'm just doing my process.
Yeah.
And because I love it, it's easily coming out. So my point is, like, whether anyone's having their spouse having an affair or separation, divorce, whatever, there are definitely times where as men, we didn't dig deep enough because we didn't think that there was anything to dig into. But once you get into the program, you can find those things and know and learn how to dig down, learn how to get deep. And it was scary a little bit in the beginning because I don't like my feelings. I didn't like how they felt. I didn't like having to acknowledge them. But certain processes like auto suggestions and such, which if you want to get into, we can, that was extremely beneficial for me. Definitely helps bring all of that stuff out in a safe environment. And then once it does, your paradigms actually shift. And once your brain shifts, everything else follows. And then you can be confident in who you are.
Yeah. So I just want to wrap this whole point up with a summary statement of like, safety is not being a cuck. Safety is not being a doormat. If you think being a doormat is creating safety and vice versa, you don't have the right idea what safety means.
Right.
Safety is, first, you got to be super strong in the correct ways, in the interdependent way, in the high value way that we talked about, to the point where you will basically become an overflowing cup.
Yeah.
When you become an overflowing cup, you naturally in your mind, you're going, I don't need other people to fill my cup. I'm looking for other cups to fill. I'm hungry to find other cups to fill because I'm overflowing a gallon a minute here. Okay. So naturally, your question now becomes not the question you go about with life is not how can other people help me, it's how can I find people to help. And so your attention, your tuning changes completely.
Yeah.
And so safety is becoming the person who's so abundant that you naturally get to the place of compassion, giving, unselfish, but it doesn't feel like sacrifice to you.
Right.
And that's the strength with that is so strong that people will naturally gravitate towards that and feel safe with that. Safety becomes a natural byproduct. Now, sometimes when you have an overflowing cup, because you think so little about yourself, like not little about yourself, you think highly about yourself, but like you don't think about yourself as much. You think more about other people.
Yeah.
Sometimes the things you do can look weak. For example, if my wife has an affair, the last thing I'm thinking about is like, oh, what's in it for me? The first question I ask is, how was I not there for her? And how can I be there for her? How can I help her? That can look weak, yes, but it can also look fucking strong. Because you're so strong that you're not even worried about your well-being. Because you know you're going to be fine, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I want people to understand that, right? Like, and I think it's the same reason why a lot of really wealthy people, a lot of really high value people, they don't look high value. Because they don't need to talk about it. They don't need to worry about it. Right? They don't need to overtly show off and do high value things because that's not what they're thinking about anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And I used to be,
yeah, go ahead.
It used to be like, just to cap that off a little bit, like she considered me to be fake a lot. What I mean by that is, in my personality, the way I would show up and act, I tried to, as a young entrepreneur, just out of college, tried to fake it until you make it. I'm sure people have heard that term before. Fake it until you make it. So I would always dress up nice, even though I had, $5 in the bank. But that helped me kind of shift who I was, but it was all a facade. So for whatever reason, for her, she could see right through that. And that in and of itself made it feel unsafe because this dude's not genuine. He's not real. And so it might get you to a place where it got me to a place where it was like, okay, now we're dating, but I have to either keep this up or change. But the good thing is in the program is that all of those many years, I'm 38. So all of those years of all those learned lessons, good, bad, or indifferent, they kind of all get culminated into this one place where I felt like I'm going to deal with it all. Like, what better time than now to deal with it all? And through all that is what created the safety that we needed, that she felt like she needed, because now when I'm overflowing, like you mentioned, it comes out natural.
Yeah.
Like you and I aren't scripting this conversation. We're just chatting. We're just
it comes out natural.
talking.
Yeah.
So like and I'm not saying that I'm doing a great job or whatever, but with her, it's like I don't have to force it or try or be fake or come up with something and write poetry, and I don't need to do any of that. It just comes out because it's now ingrained in me, and it's only going to get better, right? Because we keep doing this on the daily. How many years have you been in this and you're still doing it probably every single day, right?
Yeah.
Your process never stops.
Because it feels natural to me. And before we transition to the next point, it's like to give you another example of like this natural overflowing cup. So sometimes, right, I do things for my wife that a lot of men in the red pill movement would consider like freaking cocks, right? Like, I am always there for her. I'm always like, I have her well-being in mind, often sometimes more than my own well-being too. And I often like go way above and beyond for her in crazy ways sometimes. And yes, I can do it out of like a weak place to be like, oh, I need your approval, so come with me. But to be honest, I'm doing it from a place of I don't need to do anything for myself. I don't need to buy anything for myself. I don't need to get anything for myself. I don't need any emotional safety. I don't need any like I can source it all from within. It's because from the moment I wake up, I'm thinking about how can I create value? How can I create value? None of it is like, how can I create value for me? Nowhere is that in the equation. So I end up doing a lot of things that a lot of weak people do from a completely different intention, from a completely different place that is not needy. And that changes everything, right?
Yeah.
And people can feel that. People like your wives can feel that, the genuineness of that. And that's what women fall in love with. They fall in love with that kind of power, right? So yes, sometimes women fall for the wrong kinds of power because they it's hard to get to know the full depth of someone from a few dates. So you see some patterns. You're like, okay, this guy is rich. This guy's looks whatever. It must be good. But then once she sees like, oh, that's not coming from a good place, she will see that pretty quick, and she will see pretty quick too when you can do some like cuck things, but when you do it from a good place, she can see that too pretty quickly, right? And so you can do like cuck things, but somehow women feel attracted to that. That's why, because it's not the things that women are attracted to, is the symbol behind it, and the symbol is safety. And that's it. So you talk about this loving your process intrinsically, and I think so. Let me leave these open first. When did you start falling in love with the process quite intrinsically, and why? What made you fall in love with the process intrinsically? Because a lot of people have a hard time with that.
Yeah, I would say well, it was probably once I did my iteration in P1M7. So as soon as I started working on urgency, that's when I started falling in love with it because I knew I was making progress.
Mm.
I didn't fall in love with the process because you told me to, or as much as I could say I want to be addicted to something, you have to do it over and over again to become addicted. Like I was using oxys, that's what I got hooked on as a kid, right? So in high school or college, that's what I started using. You only have to use them a couple times to get addicted, and then that's why the pharma is like that. But for most other things, you have to do it enough to where you become addicted to it. So by that time, I had probably been like a month and a half or more into the program. I had been seeing people that started around the same time as me flying by, or some people in P3 getting their outcomes. And I was just like, either I'm doing this wrong or this is just how long it takes. And I didn't know which. So I was just like, keep my head down and keep moving. But what really helped me fall in love was the principles all made sense to me. You take it to such an extreme level in some of the modules where you use like case studies, examples, and videos and all this stuff. But to me, it was like once I started seeing results of the fruit of my labor, that's even if it was just internally, that's what helped me fall in love with it because I'm going, you keep hammering it into my brain to not focus on the outcome, right? Focus on the process, but to actually love something to where you're encouraging yourself to do it. That was the first inkling. When I absolutely fell in love to the point where I'm like, I'm never going to stop this again was when I created my becoming self, which is way later. So I had that first intrinsic value understanding, right? The chart that goes up, had that initially in P1, which helped me sustain. And then by P2, I had the ASs that were helping me sustain. But once I really got into who I want to be and defining that, having all the principles and internal shifts that I had before, that's when I knew for a fact this is lifelong. And it took me a while to get there, but I got there.
But it's also like if you akin it to like fitness, for example, I think a lot of men can understand this, is if you're fat, for example, or very unfit, the reason why you're unfit is because the process of getting fit you don't like.
Yeah.
So you like the wrong things, so eating junk food and being lazy, and you like the bad habits, but getting out to work out, rain or shine, eating healthy is just something you don't like. If you liked eating healthy, you wouldn't have been fat in the first place, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes people come into the program and they're like, well, I have to do this work, but I don't like it. Well, yeah, I know you don't like it. That's why you're here. But the reason why we have the process, the auto-suggestion process of like the last part is like, what do you want to mythologize and how will you mythologize it? That's the point, is to get you hooked. And so if you're saying right now that you don't like the process of getting hooked to the right process, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like,
there's no other option. Like you do it or you don't do it. But like you said, once you do it, once I did it anyway, I'm a songwriter too. Like I have that music side creative brain. So to me, again, with the poetry and stuff, it's not like I'm a poet, but it helped. I'm good at writing. So it helped me that I had that skill, right, to write. But you still have to tailor it like anything else. I would write a lot and James might come back and be like, dude, this makes no sense. Do it again. And I thought my writing was very good. But once you start getting through that process of reiterating and doing it over again, which again, POS, that's from module 1, right? Is you're literally learning how to learn. When you know how to put that process of success together, it just becomes this, okay, on to the next and on to the next. There's no end goal. That's took me a long time to understand too, which is this is not, you're not submitting a book report for a grade and then you go to the next grade. This is like an ongoing thing. So that's when I really started to grasp it, because I created an AS, for example, for urgency and thought, man, this is so great. And I honestly felt about 4 or 5 days later, after listening to it every day, I felt no urgency, and I have not felt it since that day. But that doesn't mean I didn't go back and do a version 2 of urgency to make it even better.
Yeah.
So like it's an ongoing process that I enjoy doing. And when I saw again the fruit of it, I'm like, this is awesome. Why I don't know anybody else teaching this stuff.
And I think the process that I think a lot of people misunderstand is that part of the process of loving the process is loving the process of finding flaws.
Oh yeah.
Right. So a lot of people say, for example, how can I love the process? It's every time I submit something, you shit on it. Well, that's a very ironic statement, because the process is learning to love feedback. So you're saying right now, like, you cannot love the process of getting feedback because you got feedback. Like, the
Were you
process
expecting
is
good feedback, or what? Like, what was the expectation, right?
yeah, but that's like, I hope people see the irony in that, right? It's like, you cannot say I want to get addicted to growth, because when you say that, you're also saying I want to get addicted to people giving me antithesis or feedback or telling me what I'm doing wrong. And so if you're saying like, I hate it when people tell me what I'm doing wrong, you're also saying I don't want to grow. So you cannot say I want to grow but not take feedback. That doesn't go together. So yeah.
It's
I think
tough,
that was
man.
what
Like
you're speaking about. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I had a lot of constructive criticism, I'll call it, in many areas of my life when it came to my growth, right? So like I went to a Christian recovery home when I first got off of drugs, and it was very military style. It was like in downtown LA next to Dodger Stadium, bars on the window. I was the only white dude there. It was all Hispanic, Bloods and Crips in the neighborhood. It was the worst neighborhood possible. And I'm coming from like being in the music industry and, doing whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. So that humbled me straight away. But once being in that environment, I had to learn how to do things and take criticism, and I had to do it or else leave. But because it was helping me, I would just suck it up and do it. And that kind of became a pattern in my life, especially even with, doing physical training, firearm training. These guys who are like, military or MARSOC or any special forces, they don't care about your feelings. They tell you to do something, you do it. And you have thick skin or you don't, or you develop it. But in this program, by the time I got here, I was like, tough love. I'm used to that. Like, bring it. Like, just tell me flat out, I don't want to waste time for you to be nice to me. So I think if you can develop that skill early, it will only benefit you, because like you're not shitting on somebody's stuff just to be a jerk. You're saying like, no, fix it.
Fix it.
Move
Yeah.
on. Like
You can
that's
do
it.
better. Fix it.
Yeah.
But also it's like this, right? It's like when you said, I think I also regarded myself as someone who took feedback well for all my life. But here's a distinction. I took feedback well back then because I knew the feedback was a means to an end. So I just sucked my way through it. Right? I didn't like feedback, but I knew it was a necessary evil. But the difference now is that I actually like feedback. I actually cherish it. I actually look for it. And I don't know what feedback, what the feedback or the criticism is going to lead me to. I don't know what outcome is going to lead me to. But I just like it. I just like the feedback intrinsically. And that's the intrinsic part.
Yeah.
And that makes a big difference, because when you can get there, where the feedback no longer becomes a means to an end that you have to suck up to, I mean, that's when you unlock so much learning. And that's what Eric was saying when he says like intrinsically loving the process, and the process never ends, because like why would you want the process to end if you like being in the process in the first place? You know, if I like the movie, if I like a video game, I don't want the video game to end. I don't want there to be an outcome. You know?
Yeah. Where do you, so let me ask you this, because I kind of know it for myself, but where do you think that comes from in terms of uh how you can turn the process? So like, for example, we in the program do we celebrate process wins over outcome wins, right? To me, that was the number one thing that helped me start to shift that way. When it comes to criticism, though, how would you suggest that someone really develop that skill? Because for me, it was like I had to be put in painful situations and just learn to suck it up. But maybe some people have never been in a painful situation until now, and they don't know how to do that. So I'm trying to brainstorm, like, how do you actually teach someone that maybe has had a great life and never had to endure suffering to really accept the feedback as positive, even if it hurts their feelings?
Good question. And I'm going to say I don't know.
Yeah.
Because to me, the pain must be there.
Right.
Because like part of my auto suggestion, Eric, is telling myself, right? I have felt the pain of not knowing. I also have felt the pain of faking knowing. I don't want to be there anymore. I have been broke before. I have been at a position where like that pain, I remember that pain that I felt when I kept blaming my partners for leaving, and I just could never understand why they were leaving. And I felt like something was so alien to me. Like I felt like I didn't belong. That feeling of something was wrong, but not knowing what was wrong, and me blaming the world, me hating the world, was so painful for me. I never want to see it again. And so part of my auto suggestion is like, why I love learning is that I don't need someone to tell me I'm awesome. I don't need someone to tell me I'm doing well. I want someone to tell me how I suck. Because I get my happiness from actually winning in life, kind of thing. And you don't appreciate winning until you have lost and felt the pain from that loss. Which is why, you know, if you look at the program too, we only enroll people who are in very dire situations because, to be honest, the program is technically open for people who are not in dire situations. But I can tell you exactly 0 per people have bought it. Because if you're not in dire situation, that pain is not going to push you anywhere. It's not going to make you want to do anything, take action. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And it's interesting too, because my girl said that exact same thing recently. She's like, I know this, she apologized actually for this entire thing, and I wasn't expecting it. And I think I might have wrote this to you or messaged it to you, but she called me into the room one day and was just like, hey, I just wanted to apologize about everything. And I wasn't expecting it, and I didn't really need the apology. So I just kind of smiled and smirked and like said, you know, it's all good. I'm actually glad that we went through this. And she mentioned later something along the lines of kind of what you just said, which is it's kind of nice that you did go through the pain, because without that loss, you wouldn't have changed. Without your fear of losing me, this is from her mouth, you probably wouldn't have changed this dramatically. And it's not like she did it on purpose and said like, I'm going to put divorce on the table for Eric to change. She was ready to bounce. It had nothing to do with me at that point. But she recognized that like it was that fear of loss that at least sparked my initiation into finding whatever I needed to find. Right. And so
You know
that
what?
is true.
Now that I hear that, it rings something in my head, right? So here's something. So pain is a polarizer. Pain is not a teacher. Pain is a polarizer. Because I can see some people going through pain and choosing the wrong path completely. I could see people going through pain and never growing from it.
That's true.
They just become more embittered. They just lower their standards and never grow from it. So pain is a polarizer in a sense of that's a fork where you either grow or you go deep or you regress.
Yeah.
Now, you asked me the question, right? What about if you never felt pain? To be honest, we all have felt pain.
Yeah.
Whether we acknowledge the pain, whether we allow ourselves to sit in the pain. Like my wife has a great analogy on this, right? It's like, because she teaches women how to become women, from girls to women, and she uses like the Greek mythology a lot. And one of the things in Greek mythology is like, how do you become a maiden to like a woman, right? Maiden is like a young girl, innocent, whatever it is. How do you evolve? How you evolve is the maiden must make mistakes, feel the pain from the mistakes, and once they feel the pain, they need to keep going deeper into the cave. If now some women who are maidens who feel the pain, they go into the cave gets scary, they bump out. And so some women never graduate from maidens. But the women who go in to the cave and keep going in, they become a woman, kind of thing. And it's the same thing with life, right? So if you haven't really felt the pain, is it because you haven't really felt pain, or is it because you never really entertained that pain?
Right.
When the pain comes, you shrug it off, you resist it, you blame other people. And I understand why, like, the videos around like why my wife is a narcissist, 10 times my wife is a narcissist, whatever it is, gets a lot of views, because that's a great way out.
Yeah.
Out of the cave, right? Oh, I don't need to keep going because it's not me. I don't need to grow. I don't need to go in this cave because it's not me.
Right.
So that's the first question I want to ask. Is like, have you actually felt pain? Have you never felt pain? Or did you just not realize it? Do you get out of the cave too early? The other thing is, you can always manufacture pain. Like, I'm sure we all have sat in our beds and worried about something that hasn't happened yet, but our worry manifests itself physically in such a way that we have felt it. Like we sweat, our heartbeat goes up, we cannot sleep. Like we're feeling it very viscerally. And that's actually what I do a lot in my business, right? I tell my employees all the time, I put myself in the red lane a lot. So I put myself in a position where, sure, maybe this strategy that I'm doing, this thing I'm doing, has not created that much pain yet. But let me imagine, or let me visualize a scenario where it is painful. Worst case scenario, for example. And I feel that pain. I see that pain, and I realize I never needed to make the mistake. I already felt it in my dreams. I never want to fucking feel that. I think that's another way you can manufacture pain.
Yeah. That makes sense. No, it totally gets that. I think it's too like the manufacturing of the pain can be, I suppose, anything too. Like I do ice baths, saunas, they all suck, but they have a purpose at the end. But I think what connected with me with what you said is like that emotional pain, it can come from anywhere. I guess it's similar to how we can paraphrase. We may have never been able to experience exactly what our partners have experienced, but we
can
still have
imagine.
something that we can
Yeah,
relate
can
to.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what the other thing I think about too is like pleasure versus satisfaction. So I think a lot of people's definition of pain is lack of pleasure. But my definition of pain is lack of satisfaction. So you talk about like ice baths, for example. It's objectively unpleasurable, but it's very satisfying.
Right.
Gym, same thing, right? So I have fallen in love with the satisfaction, not the pleasure. Right? I don't care about pleasure. I care about satisfaction. Like, for example, when we take vacations, me and my wife, we don't go to paradise. When we take a vacation, we like, for example, we have planned a trip to Hawaii, not to go to Hawaii. We are going to visit a leper colony.
Oh, cool.
Because that's our idea of vacation. We are not looking for pleasure. We're looking for satisfying moments. That is often not pleasurable, but gives long-term kind of results, you know?
That's awesome. That's a cool way to think about it, actually.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm going to keep that.
I think that was it for the questions, man. This is over 2 hours already. This is 2 hours, 20 minutes. So I think we're on the long side.
That flew by.
I know. I know. So, okay. One last thing is like, I think the thing I don't want to happen is people will look at your story right now And people always try to find a way to belittle people's stories here. A
Hmm.
few ways I can think people can belittle your story is like, well, your wife is religious, so because of that, I think the odds of her getting divorced would be lower.
Hmm.
Another way people can belittle your situation is like, well, your wife was talking to you. My wife is not talking to me. So
Hmm.
my case is different from yours. How would, like, let's say you're standing in front of someone who's trying to unique circumstance their way out of their
Yeah.
situation right now.
Well, the first thing I would say is, especially if you are Christian, religious, don't believe in divorce, whatever, like we kind of already discussed, technically we are divorced, but it has become one of the greatest things to ever happen. And it sounds insane to say that or hear that when you're in the suffering part of it and you're like blindsided like me, but it's the process in and of itself will help you get to a place intrinsically where, for example, if she said to me today after this, she says, hey, instead of going to the movies, I'm going to go out with someone else. My first thought would not be panic or fear anymore. My first thought would be interesting. Why would she make that decision?
Hmm.
And antithetically thinking about that in a calm way, being able to communicate and not think about the outcome, because I'm not trying to manufacture an outcome. I'm not trying to solicit an outcome from her or elicit a response. All I'm trying to do is understand why she's going through what she's going through and made that decision and then make her feel understood. And to me, that is a skill that I could only have learned if this process had happened. So that's number one. What was the second one that you rebutted?
Uh, it was mostly about, well, it can be infinite, but like the second one I said was about your wife is talking to you, so my wife is not. So like
Right.
that's why you can do it, but I can't.
Yeah. So there's a double-edged sword there, in my opinion, because I've talked with guys who are in no contact and I've talked with guys who still live in the same environment. I think on either side of the fence, you wish you were on the other side of the fence because you see advantages in both. But for me, it was more nerve-wracking being around because I didn't get an opportunity uh, to communicate until I had learned how to communicate. And that didn't come for like 4 months, right? Into my
Mm.
process. I know some people get to three way quicker. I did not. I don't think. I'm pretty sure it was like around 3.5 months or something. So like all I had in my toolbox was a TTH, and I had to become really good at that. And it wasn't because I didn't want to. It was literally genuinely because I didn't know how yet. So if you're on my side of the fence when it comes to your in-house, like you have your tools. If she's not communicating with you, to me, that would have, again, in my brain, it sounded better in the beginning because I was thinking, well, I get to grow and not have to have these awkward moments in the house. If I see her in the kitchen and she's doing something, and like my normal reaction would be to go over and embrace her or smack her butt. Like I did a lot of just normal guy things when we were together. Now I can't do any of that because she's like, don't touch me, right? Like we're not together anymore. So it was super awkward. You don't really have that. You get to show up as your best self or your new self as whenever that happens. So
Yeah.
to me, that would be the benefit. For me, it was super awkward. We were going out together. I'll say this too. This is super important. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but for me, it was really awkward. She would tell me that she felt physically safe around me, but she would take her ring off. She would ask me to go out with her and her girlfriends. I would go out. I would see her flirt with other guys. She would tell me go flirt with other women, but yet she wanted me around because she knew if she got like in a bad situation in some of these pubs that we were in, that I would be there to protect her. So I'm having to like the point of it all is that like whether you're with someone or whether you're with her or you're not with her, you still have to build your bulletproof vest. You still have to have the internal shifts and you still have to work on yourself regardless of the situation. It's just when you show up in that exact moment when it's game time, you have to be ready. So to me, if you're not around that person, you have to do the exact same work that I had to do. But when it's game time, you damn sure better show up.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly the brass tacks of it, you have to show up.
That's the beautiful way to put it, because like you can manufacture excuses everywhere you go. It's funny you say that because like even James, right? James was in contact. Sabor was already divorced, no contact. Jason was kind of in the middle. Jason had a daughter who passed away.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Sabor had issues with his partner being like having gone through her own traumas and insane traumas. James was an asshole online. He used to bully people online. So like people's situations are always very different. But again, like you
Always.
said, it's always greener on the other side, and you can always like both people cannot be complaining.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, it's like, how badly do you really want? To be honest, how badly do you want to get out of your pain, and how badly do you want to grow out of your pain? Really, is your excuses like, if you're letting your excuses win, that means that staying in the pit is not painful enough. And staying in the pit is less painful than doing the work to get out of the pit. But it's only when the pain from being in the pit outweighs the pain of doing the work, then you do the work. And I think, all the excuses die. So guys, if one of the biggest things I would hate for someone is like, and I will always say to people, don't waste the pain. If you're going through a divorce or separation, or your wife having an affair, whatever your case is, I don't know what your case is. But if this moment is painful for you, this is a moment where you can either learn, grow fast, or digress or regress. A lot of people, and I'll say this like proudly, a lot of people have joined other programs. I think a lot of other programs make you regress. Some programs do smart contact, some programs do letter writing, some programs do high value man, whatever it is. I think they all make you regress. So if you want to actually have a program that allows you to progress in the correct way and not waste the pain, because you only live one life, just open your mind and check out the masterclass. I don't care if you buy the program or not. I don't care if you go and say like, this is not for me. Just check it out. If you want to check it out, down the link below. If you feel like there's a right fit for you, apply. We'll send the instructions to apply in the last 20 minutes of that masterclass. So pay attention to that. But Eric, thank you so much, man. This is amazing. Like, as soon as I saw your write-up, I was like, this is going to be a great conversation, because it's fun to see someone live the program like I do, and we can geek out about it together, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fun, you know?
Yeah. And what's cool, dude, is like when I geek out about it with Steph, she's cool with it because she's like, yeah, that all makes sense. Some of the principles that you taught me, I'll say them to her and she'll be like, duh, I already knew that. So like she's leagues above, and I'm like back here going, like I'm on ground level. So I'm just starting to kind of catch up when it comes to the personal growth. But I would just say with this last thing is, for anybody who's thinking about joining or who is in the program, there is nothing more important than following it in the exact order. And the internal shifts must come first before you conversate. I made that mistake where I wasn't fully bulletproof. I was like, I'm good, move in, and collapse. Had scripts ready, had all this. None of that works. The only thing that works is your internals coming out. And nowadays, like I said, when we have conversations, like I get giddy because I'm like, oh, let me tell you about SOC, or let me tell you about like interdependence. And like we use it in our conversations now. And thing behind the thing has become this cool thing where she'll be talking about something like in her world of like the church or whatever, and be like, the thing behind the thing is this. And I'm like, she's using the program language. Because it works. Like it's true. It's legit principles.
You see it everywhere.
Legit processes. Yeah.
You see it everywhere. And every time we watch a movie or TV show now, we think, oh, safety. Oh, this is this principle being at play. Oh, interesting. This is this, right? It's like, yeah. Yeah. That's
Totally.
fun. Yeah.
Cool, man.
All right, man. Well, have a good
Appreciate you.
evening. Yeah. See you in the program. Keep going.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you later. Bye.